Here's your host, Alex Garrett.
Ladies and gentlemen, you could have been anywhere in the world tonight, but you're here with us in New York City. Are you ready?
I know I am. Hey, I'm Alex Garrett, your host for this episode and everything Alex Garrett Podcasting. And this podcast specifically focuses on topics that should be trending. And, well, you know what they say, right?
Oh, if the shoe fits, wear it.
Well, that line means so much to me. Find out why next on Alex Garrett Podcasting, where we wear that shoe proudly. Well, he's back, and actually, I think he's got a couple new roles here. John T. Bennett. He's with The Independent. He was a former White House correspondent with Roll Call. But first of all, John, welcome back, and tell us your new role as the Washington Bureau Chief and columnist at The Independent. Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I made the move over to The Independent in late January, so rolled in right in time for an impeachment hearing. So that was an interesting way to start a new job. But what we're trying to do here in D.C., along with my congressional and political correspondent, Griffin Connolly, who I brought over from Roll Call, talented young reporter, we're trying to establish a D.C. presence as The Independent tries to continue its expansion here in the United States, build a readership here in the United States, and try eventually, and this is of course a long-term project, but try to become a player here in DC political reporting, and then in broader political reporting, and even what we would call general assignment reporting here in the States. Still a very small staff here in DC and in New York, but our traffic is very impressive. And like a Trump tweet, as Sean Spicer used to tell us, the traffic speaks for itself.
Well, let me tell you really quickly, I always think The Independent's a lot more verifiable, I should say, than the Daily Mail. I feel like you guys are always in competition in the UK over there.
Oh, well, those are your words. I know my colleagues at the Daily Mail, they work as hard as we do, and especially right now, all of us are typing into laptops and on our phones. We're all in this together right now, so but we're definitely in competition. And we want to get to a place where we're not just competing with those guys, but we want to get to a place where we're beating them as often as they're beating us in other outlets.
Okay, so, and you do the U.S. stuff, but I feel like Britain's dealing with other stuff too with the lockdowns. But let's focus on here. So what did people wake up to this morning in The Independent in your coverage of the debate? What did people wake up to in The Independent readership today?
Yeah, we really focused last night on Senator Harris attacking Vice President Pence, and really more than that, the Vice President was sitting behind his plexiglass saliva guard, but that was really Donald Trump at a lot of times last night sitting there. Pence was just a proxy, and we focused on Senator Harris going after the Trump record and trying to press the vice president on everything from coronavirus to the way the economy collapsed during the shutdown, and how it has really grown slowly. The White House not pleased with the jobs report this morning, obviously released after the debate, and I'm sure the vice president is breathing a little easier because it was. But that was our main focus. I wrote after the debate, sat down, took a lap or two around my abode, and thought about it. And what I wrote, my big takeaway was they both just ignored. They didn't even dodge. They just ignored questions, the big questions that mattered. The vice president on protecting pre-existing conditions if the Supreme Court shoots down Obamacare, and also he, just like the president, the vice president would not say that the two of them would honor the outcome of the election, whatever it might be, but especially if they lose. And Senator Harris was pressed on whether Vice President Biden, if he's elected, intends to pack the Supreme Court. And, of course, that means that means the Constitution does not say it has to be 9 justices. It I guess could be as big as anyone wants it to be, as many justices as you could cram on there in one term or one half term before a congressional midterm election. So, Chuck Schumer, AOC, a lot of Democrats have talked about if Biden wins and Democrats take the Senate, they should just add liberal justices and get a majority on the Supreme Court. I'm chuckling because I'm not sure Chuck Schumer would actually go through with that, but we'll see. But Senator Harris asked about that last night, just like Vice President Biden. She would not say yay or nay.
Okay.
So that's a big issue. That's a huge issue, and I keep waiting for the Vice President to answer that. And just like she did last night, they just ignore it and dance around it. So that was my takeaway. They were happy to joust on the issues that all 4 of them joust on every day on Twitter, on cable interviews, speeches, rallies. But on those big issues, we're still waiting for answers, and I just don't know if we're going to get them. I doubt we're going to get them before the 3rd of November.
Well, I got to tell you, the reason why I brought you on today, and we'll have to see the health of the president and the VP. I agree, Vice President Biden. There was no actual direct answer to that. But your tweet about where can I get this presidential mask that Trump has on with the seal on one side? He has the kind we buy at CVS or Amazon. I found that a funny take. But what was your serious take or even humorous take about all of this, him being hospitalized? I just could tell you had a little humor that you wanted to add to the conversation here. Sure,
and I'll take you behind the curtain a little bit from my days as a White House correspondent, covering the White House every day. Down there when Trump was in town, 3 or 4 days a week, and seeing some of the behind the scenes before the camera started rolling for everyone else, it became very apparent 6 months, 8 months in, as Trump caught his breath and then kind of started to get his legs as president and figure it out, just like any new president has to, but especially someone who, by all accounts, did not expect to win, even on election night. He really fell in love, like many presidents do, with some of the trappings of the office, not a criticism, just that's the way it is, including the presidential seal. You may notice that when the president does just about anything, I'm focusing mostly on official White House events, that the dark blue flag with the seal of the office of the president is usually over one of his shoulders, or it's right behind him, or it's in the camera shot. And he knows that. He manages his camera shot. This is a reality TV guy, after all.
Yeah.
So also, fast forward to the virus, and the first time the president produced a mask when pressed by the traveling press pool, I think he was in Michigan or one of the swing states at a factory that was producing ventilators or masks or something for the virus. He pulled it out of his suit pocket, his inside breast pocket, and I noticed immediately it had on one of the sides, I believe it's the right side, maybe it's one of the sides, the seal of the office of the president. You may remember he was wearing it when he went to the Supreme Court to pay respects to the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. He wears it everywhere. He was photographed wearing it and he was on video. That's the mask he was wearing Friday night when he was essentially airlifted to Walter Reed Hospital. Well, he came out Monday, and he was wearing the same kind of mask that I had worn out earlier Monday when I ran a few morning errands and went down to check my mail in my building here in D.C. There's a mask mandate if you're not inside your residence. I have a nice mask, and I have the disposable mask, we've said you get at CVS, that blue almost paper thing. And, they don't last a long time. You have to throw them out. Donald Trump, Mr. Presidential Seal, Donald Trump, who has a gold-plated penthouse in Manhattan with a building with his name on it, was wearing a CVS mask. And I just wondered if, knowing this president like we do, if he was planning to walk out of Walter Reed not wearing a mask. Because he got to the White House and he ripped off the
that
CVS mask.
As quick as possible, by the way.
as soon as he got up to the Truman balcony, as soon as he got as far enough away from the Secret Service and his photographer and the press pool that was waiting to chronicle his arrival at the White House and some of his staff that was down on the ground level. As soon as he got upstairs, he could not get that thing off fast enough.
John, go ahead. Sorry.
And so I had to wonder if the showman's showman was going to walk out of Walter Reed COVID positive without a mask and again downplay the virus, and that's exactly what he did as soon as he got back home.
John, I got to tell you, it was the first night of fall for me, and I happened to be in a CVS, speaking of CVS, and I said, man, you got a nice fall decor here. So I literally took my first picture of the fall in CVS, so it's kind of like a full circle thing. But
there you go.
I don't know if he's 100% still. He's still breathing heavy. I mean, you see him, or you tracked him. I mean, is his breathing worse than it was like a couple of years ago? Have you seen any improvement even over the weekend? What are your thoughts on him? Because this is a serious issue now that he still is battling this, I think.
Sure. I mean, the White House released another video. It was recorded yesterday, but they released another one this afternoon, and he looks great. He that was a 5-minute video. He got through that. We don't know if it was edited, but he did an hour-long back and forth on Fox Business this morning with Maria Bartiromo, and boy, the two of them, they're very similar personalities, and he would go on 5 and 6-minute answers. Of course, she would she would interrupt with follow-up questions, but they bantered for an hour, and I don't remember this morning thinking anything except, wow, he sounds amazing for a guy who was airlifted to the hospital less than a week ago. As far as his overall health, he's a heavier guy for sure. He's heavier than the doctors have said on their medical reports, or he has led on at rallies jokingly. He's acknowledged his weight, but he's not a healthy guy. He's 74 years old. He's overweight. He doesn't exercise. No golf. He rides a cart, so golf doesn't really count. And you'll see him at rallies. You'll see him behind the scenes, waiting for events to start. And it's not that he seems winded, but he'll take a deep breath or two. He'll pause in between sentences. He kind of sucks his teeth. We all know people who do that. He does that. But it was noticeable to me in one of the videos over the weekend that they shot from Walter Reed. They released it late at night, and he seemed short of breath for sure then. He definitely seemed like he was fighting to get air in on Monday night when he got back to the White House, and he had to climb kind of two half flights of stairs to get to the Truman balcony, and he definitely the video shows it. Anybody can go watch that he was gasping for air as if you or I had just gone out and jogged a half mile or a mile. He was definitely a little bit gassed, if you will. So. Sure. But this morning, he sounded like his old self. He sounded, as I would describe it, as Trump at his peak kind of powers. And we know that one of his powers is firing up his base with those kind of rowdy rallies and those rowdy Fox call-ins. Yeah. And you couldn't tell anything's wrong this morning, but that could just be because he has been pumped full of these powerful antibody therapeutics and this very powerful steroid, and their testimonials, people can look it up online. Folks have written about themselves being diagnosed the steroid and saying they felt euphoric, but they also kind of lost touch with reality at times. So this is really, really bizarre stuff, and the president's got to be very careful with his health, because we know that coronavirus patients can feel fine, especially when they're medicated, after day 5 and 6, and then they can take a turn. And again, he's 74. He's got a heart condition. Even if it's common, there's no such thing as a common heart condition. And he's overweight. So, and he said in the video today, the new video, that he knows he's at risk, but he's charging ahead, and he wants to get back on the campaign trail, but
Sure.
He's really got to be careful.
Well, and if I can say, I'm personally in that same boat. Like, I don't want to stop my life, but I also need to be cautious. I've got one kidney, and I roll it on one leg, and the leg's not the issue, but it's the internal stuff that I always... So I wish on Monday he would have said, don't be afraid, but be cautious. I think if he said that, everybody would have taken a bigger, deep breath.
He did. He said in the middle of all of that, he did say, be careful, and he said that over the weekend, and he had talked to some folks on the phone, and he told them to go on television and talk to folks like you and radio guys and gals and tell people to be careful. But he never says the words, right? He never says wear a mask. He does say stay away from people, but then, he says stay away from people as he's yelling over Marine One on the South Lawn, and then he flies to a rally and all of his supporters are tightly packed around and inside an airport hangar. So which is it, Mr. President?
Well, and one other thing I will say that people didn't really pick up on is I've heard him multiple times say, if I'm on an elevator or if I'm in close quarters, I put the mask on. And I thought that was not documented at all over the last few months. But he has said stuff like that. John T. Bennett, who we're talking to, he's with the Independent now, and Washington bureau chief down there in Washington. Has there ever been a health scare? I mean, what was the health scare Obama and Bush had, or whomever you've covered? I feel like it wasn't like this, right? But has there been a health scare that you had to cover before?
Not that I had to cover. I mean, President Bush, and I don't mean this jokingly, but President Bush once choked on a pretzel, and the Secret Service came in and had to help get the pretzel out of his throat. He's watching football, and we've all done that,
Yeah.
What comes to mind, and a lot of people probably saw the pictures over the weekend, but it was a scheduled thing. It wasn't an emergency. President Reagan had surgery to remove some colon cancer, and he stayed in the same suite. I'm sure it's been overhauled 15 times since then, but he stayed in the same suite, the presidential suite at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. He was out of commission for a little while. He was under. He had anesthesia, so he was under during the surgery, and he stayed there for a few days, as anyone would after that kind of surgery. But that's really, for me, what comes to mind. The only other thing, and we're still left questioning President Trump's own unplanned, mysterious visit to Walter Reed in November.
You're reading my mind. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, the day's press pool. It was later in the day, but the day's press pool suspected, maybe he's going to go play 9 holes of golf or something. Because even in November in the afternoon, you could get 7 or 9 holes in.
Sure.
And instead, he walked out. He was carrying a beige envelope, like a mailing envelope, and got into the armored SUV, and off they went. So that comes to mind as well. That was shrouded in still secrecy. They claim he was doing part of his annual physical. They've never finished that physical, and but they've never shown any documentation, really official documentation from the November trip. So that comes to mind. President Obama was lucky enough to be a young man, a healthy man. He didn't really have any health scares. So those are the two. I have seen some speculation, but not really from credible sources, and some cable folks have speculated on air that the November Trump trip to Walter Reed was somehow related to what we saw over the weekend. But as of right now, we have to take the doctor's word for it that he was there and treated for coronavirus.
John, the other thing is how heavy, last night's debate is. I don't think we've ever had such a more impactful VP debate because of the health of these two candidates, the president and Vice President Biden.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because another thing in my post-debate analysis piece last night that I mentioned was Susan Glasser of USA Today was the moderator, and she asked them both that very question, both Vice President Pence and Senator Harris. The former Vice President Biden 77, President Trump 74, and she asked them, have they talked to their running mates about what they should do and what the two candidates at the top of the ticket would prefer them to do should something happen, and the two vice presidential candidates would obviously have to take over as president, and neither of them indicated that they had that conversation. And I just found that interesting, especially knowing Vice President Biden, who President Trump likes to remind us has a 47-year Washington career and is an institutionalist. He's a big believer in the Senate and all that, and has talked about, he was Judiciary Committee chairman and was a big believer in an independent judiciary. And obviously, once he got in the executive branch, he advised President Obama on how to best use the executive branch. So he believes in the institutions here in Washington. He's talked about that. For him to not have a sit down with Senator Harris, and for her to not even say, yeah, Joe and I talked about it, but that was a private conversation. But yes, we talked about that. I thought that was very telling. And I would not expect Vice President Pence to publicly acknowledge that Donald Trump acknowledged his own mortality. So, maybe a little troubling the vice president wouldn't admit it, but certainly not off-brand for Trump or Pence.
However, if you look at one of the first videos, he said, we got to get through the next 48 hours. It seemed like he was very cognizant his health was at risk, even the first night at Walter Reed, which I thought was astonishing considering Trump never thinks he's going to die, it seems like, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, but it's one thing for Trump to acknowledge his own mortality. It's another thing for Mike Pence to do it.
True, because then he'd be like, well, okay, so they're talking about it. Well,
yeah, I mean, there's stuff that my boss can say out loud, but I'm not going to say it.
Hey, I've got a question for you because, journalism, I asked someone in the medical field, but journalism also, you might have had some people cheering on this diagnosis. Did you find that at all? Did you find your colleagues or whomever cheering this? Or what were you seeing reaction-wise when President Trump got corona?
Not my colleagues, no. I still consider myself part of the White House press corps. I haven't really been down there since all this started, and with the outbreak there, I'm certainly not going to head down there anytime soon. But we were just, I still interact with White House officials, and we weren't cheering, of course not. We weren't cheering for President Trump to contract the virus or get very sick or have any long-term complications or the worst-case scenario. None of that. We continue to just try to piece all of this together and get a clear picture of the President of the United States' true health condition right now. When did he test? When did he first test positive? Did he know he was positive when he went to the fundraiser in Bedminster, New Jersey, last Thursday afternoon with 200 people? We're just trying to still piece the picture together and figure out just how ill he might still be, how much is he still in a risk zone, how much is he getting another round of the remdesivir, which is the antibody treatment? Is he getting another round of the powerful steroid? We really haven't heard from Dr. Connolly in depth, I guess, since Sunday. So nobody's cheering that on. I will say some of the satirical shows that folks unfortunately turn to now as sources of serious news, and some of the opinion shows on, let's say, some of the left-leaning networks. And I was disappointed in Saturday Night Live. I thought there was some cheering at the end of their cold open, some definite cheering and sneering that the president had gotten sick. And I just thought that was over the line. I thought it was in very poor taste. There was a way to handle that, and they did, for the most part, in that cold open, which was otherwise very funny. Alec Baldwin and Jim Carrey did an outstanding job up until that point, and I just thought they crossed the line. And I definitely saw some of that on some of the more opinion-y or satirical shows. And there's just no need to wish sickness or worse
Correct.
on people. We've just gotten to a point where, because someone has a different a different view of how to solve a problem that usually we all agree the problem exists. It's just how do we get to a solution and what does it look like? And now we're wishing serious illness on each other. It's just a very sad state. I called the first presidential debate and blaming both President Trump and Vice President Biden a national embarrassment. And some of that stuff over the weekend, cheering that Trump got the virus and seeming to cheer for something really bad to happen to him, I thought that was a national embarrassment too.
I had a guest on last week who said that this is, and I know you're a history guy too, because you're obviously in politics, you love the historical of all of this. Someone said this is the founders' worst nightmare. Is that correct? Is this what they were dreading all along? That the president would get sick? A president would get sick like this?
Sure. I think it would be safe to assume that a lot of what we've seen lately would fall under the founders' nightmare. I mean, just the division and the inability to compromise. I mean, Congress was set up in a way where they were trying to force compromise and really keep it away from. They didn't want a king, so they set up a president, and they set up Congress the way they did, trying to give Congress a lot of power that it has given up to the executive branch over the years, and trying to give Congress a say and make it compromise and not have the executive have the final say or weigh in a my way or the highway type situation. And some of the moves that President Trump has made, I think, would have troubled the founders. I think the founders, frankly, would have been troubled the way second-term Barack Obama used executive orders. I don't think that's what the founders intended either. So, and then the president getting sick, they set up an order of succession, but they didn't exactly set up a way that requires a president to at least to sign over power, maybe temporarily, if he has to go under for a surgery or he's gravely ill and he's taking powerful steroids that a known side effect is to alter the mind and the world view, if you know what I mean. So the founders, you could say it's not what they intended. I think it's okay to be critical of the founders sometimes, but especially back then when medicine wasn't what it is now, I think they could have left us with a better process and some more requirements and some more standards for when a president had to sign over power, even temporarily, maybe with some time limits attached. It's just odd to me that they didn't do that.
And then one last question, because I'm sure you're weighing in on this at some point at the Independent, because I think it's a big deal. 13 members arrested for militia, and this is why I wanted to sort of wrap up with, because militia is something in the 1770s that we, helped us gain independence. Now they're and yet now they're looked at as insane. So let me ask you this: why were militias needed back then, and why are they looked at as insane now?
Back then, the founders were coming out of what they saw as an overbearing, a heavy-handed monarch in Great Britain, and even other colonists who came over who weren't British. That was the case elsewhere in Europe as well. So that was a common worry that the founders and everyone of that era had. So they wanted the people to have a way to fight back or defend themselves or even deter a strong executive from sending in the army. And remember, there wasn't a big army back then, not like now with these $1 trillion defense budgets and an army, a third of which ever even leaves the continental United States, and an Air Force and Navy, and all this stuff that could that now maybe would stand up to an executive. So all that wasn't there. And, you fast forward to now, and, we have large police forces and we have there's just more at least on paper, there's just more order, and I think the militias have been swept up. It's not like you or me or my father or my three middle of the road political buddies are interested or have joined a militia. The militias have moved to the fringes of American politics, and often we see violence come from those fringes, from the extremes of both parties, from the extremes of ideological movements, and that's the concerning part right now. Is these militias? Sure. They don't recognize kind of mainstream thought on either side of the spectrum, and they're kind of they're out there. They feel aggrieved. They feel pushed out of the process. They feel all these pressures from both sides, and people are after them. And as we saw in Michigan, they're willing to really arm themselves and try to take on the state. And that is troubling because most folks, even Republicans, they would want to vote the governor in Michigan out of office or recall her or have a special election. I don't think you're going to find even most what we would call average Republicans in Michigan want to kidnap the governor and essentially orchestrate a coup. That is so out of the mainstream. So it's different. It's also different motivations behind militias than the 1700s.
Well, that is wild. That's interesting because I feel like back then they had a lot more restrictions on themselves by Britain than we do by our own governors right now. I feel like that's the big difference, is that these governors aren't terrible people, yet King George was not that good to the colonies. So I think there's a big difference there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's right. I mean, it's just there's so many different circumstances that it's hard to compare the Michigan militia of today against a militia that helped win the Battle of Kings Mountain in the Revolutionary War. That's my hometown in North Carolina on the border with South Carolina. We like to say that our militias down there saved the United States because that battle turned the course of the Revolutionary War, and that militia was motivated to stop the Brits and win independence. And you've got a militia now that wants to overthrow a governor, kidnap a governor. Crazy. because they don't want to wear a mask to fight an airborne disease. So that's very different.
And one last thing. So are you predicting that we could see more of these plots, or is that the only one?
I think these plots exist more than we know. I think this one got to a point that law enforcement took it obviously extremely seriously and decided to stop it. Who knows how far it would have gotten? Who knows if it would have been successful? But I think this kind of thinking is out there. You find it on certain parts of the web. I think we'll see. I think just about anything is possible between now and Election Day, and then we're going to have to hit the reset button and come up with a whole new standard for what might be possible when November 3rd becomes November 4th, and we very likely do not yet have a president-elect or a president who has been reelected. So, yeah, I think violence is possible. I think these plots are possible. I also think that nothing is possible, and one of these guys wins by a comfortable enough margin that other than some protests and some marches, we move into 2021 and find out what that year has in store. So I think anything's possible. I know that's not a great answer to your question, but I think 2020 has proven that just about anything is possible.
Well, and I agree with that. I mean, I was saying the health is going to be a concern back in August because you just never know. And sure enough, COVID does play a role in this. One last thing, though, because you say next year will be easier. I do find, to be very real with you, the last 3 years have been rather calm compared to what, people on the left were saying, well, we're going to end, the world's going to end. But 3 years later, we actually got through it pretty okay, actually a little quicker, sometimes slow, sometimes quick, and then this year just was, it it happened. Whatever was supposed to happen in the universe happened in the form of the tragic corona. But for 3 years, we lived pretty peacefully, I thought.
Well, I think that's a mixed bag. I definitely think, and I wouldn't put this all on the president and his supporters by
Absolutely
any means,
not.
because I was, I view my job as viewing politicians and politics and those on both sides through the same critical lens. I certainly wouldn't call myself a Republican. I certainly wouldn't call myself a Democrat. I think both parties are very flawed right now. And I do think that we're worse off as a country in a lot of ways as far as divisions and not getting along and viewing other people as enemies, just like I said, because they have a different idea about how to solve a common problem. So, and I definitely think President Trump has poured gasoline on that fire. He's definitely poured gasoline on these deep racial tensions that we have going back to, of course, slavery. But on the flip side, Democrats' reaction to Trump, everything was treasonous, and every word out of the man's mouth and everything he tweeted, that when I was writing about tweets in the morning for roll call, sometimes I would chuckle and write a quick story, but they overreacted to everything Donald Trump did, and that made the divisions worse and the misunderstandings worse, and it just made politics, it went from a game to a blood sport to whatever the hell it is now. It's like the Hunger Games almost. So, I think we've got a long way to go. I suspect that it's not going to get any better until Donald Trump is out of office. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe a second term Donald is a kinder, gentler Donald. I have my doubts, but we'll see if he wins. Joe Biden talks a lot about being the unifier in chief. If he wins, I certainly have my doubts about that, because Republicans, Nikki Haley, the South Dakota Governor Noem, I could go down the list. Mike Pence will probably try it even if they lose in 2024. They're going to try to grab that Trump coalition, and they're going to say similar things, probably with a slightly softer touch, shall we say, than Donald Trump. But that's where the path to the nomination, at least right now in the Republican Party, is that Trump path. And that's just going to hurt national discourse and everything. And to be fair, Democrats didn't give him enough credit that at least he kept the Obama economic growth going. They certainly have a case to make that after an initial boom month or two in 2017, that the growth rate went back to the Obama growth rate. But at least he didn't screw it up, and I don't think they gave him enough credit for that.
Well, I will tell you this, and maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. A society that can't even acknowledge the president doing one thing, and in this case, to me, it's providing resources to New York. They can't now even acknowledge that he gave these states resources early on. But anyway,
I hear you, and you're right. But there's certainly a myriad things that Donald Trump won't admit Obama did, or Clinton did, Bill Clinton did, or he won't even acknowledge sometimes when they're negotiating some bill and Nancy or Chuck gave ground. He won't even acknowledge that. So it cuts both ways. They're all to blame. Both parties in this town, they're both to blame.
It sounds like we got to get a third party going, John. So, I'll
let you do the legwork of organizing it and get it rolling, and then give me a call.
All right, John. Hey, that was John T. Bennett of The Independent. Where can people follow you? And is there a newsletter you got coming out every week like you did at Roll Call?
You can follow me at Bennett John T on Twitter. That's 2 N's and 2 T's. And we do have a newsletter, Inside Washington newsletter, for subscribers of The Independent. So all folks have to do is subscribe to The Independent, and then you can sign up for our Monday through Friday morning newsletter. We look ahead, we look back, we do some analysis. It's a new product. It's a really cool product, And I really enjoy putting it together. And, we're trying to build something here. And I hope folks go to our website, independent.co.uk, grab a subscription, and then sign up for the Inside Washington newsletter.
John, we didn't even talk about the mail-in ballot chaos, so I wanted to have you back on. Just maybe.
Oh, there's plenty of time. Yeah, we can do that another time.
So we'll have you back. I'm Alex Garrett. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon. John, this was